The cold glass of champagne did little to soothe the tremor in Iris's hand. Across the glittering ballroom, a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns, she saw him, Adrian, her ex-husband, and clinging to his arm was Tessa, the woman who had dismantled their marriage, piece by painful piece. He paraded her around with the same proud smile he once reserved for Iris, a smile that now felt like a shard of glass in her heart. For a moment the air thinned, the music faded, and she was back in their shared home, the scent of Tessa's perfume a ghost in the air. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't the broken wife. She was a survivor, and her story was far from over. The invitation had arrived a month prior, a thick cream-colored cardstock with embossed silver lettering that felt both ostentatious and menacing. Viridian Dynamics Annual Gala, it announced. Iris had almost thrown it away. The company had been Adrian's world, the one he had built while she had built their home. After the divorce, every mention of Viridian felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer hers. She remembered the day she'd found the first clue. A receipt for a ridiculously expensive lingerie set from a boutique she'd never shopped at, tucked away in his gym bag. When she'd confronted him, his denial was a masterclass in gaslighting. He'd twisted her concern into paranoia, her intuition into insecurity. It was a gag gift for a colleague, Iris. You're being hysterical. But the lies, like a fraying thread, eventually unraveled. Tessa wasn't just a colleague. She was his junior project manager, 24 years old, with a ruthless ambition that mirrored his own. The divorce had been brutal. Adrian, with his high-powered lawyers and a narrative that painted her as an unstable, grasping wife, had taken almost everything. He kept the sprawling minimalist house they had designed together, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He kept the company. She was left with a modest settlement and the shell of the woman she used to be. For a year she had drifted, a ghost in her own life. Then, one morning, staring at her hollowed-out reflection, a spark of the old Iris, the one who had put herself through design school and had once dreamed of opening her own gallery, flickered to life. She started small, taking on freelance interior design projects for friends. Her reputation grew quietly, organically, through word of mouth. Her style was a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal modernism Adrian favored. She created spaces that were warm, lived in, and deeply personal, spaces that told a story. The invitation to the gala was, in a twisted way, a testament to her success. One of her recent clients, a board member at a rival tech firm, had been so impressed with her work on his penthouse that he'd become her champion, securing her a ticket to one of the city's most exclusive corporate events. It was a chance to network, to land the kind of high-profile clients that could finally put her on the map, free from the shadow of Adrian's name. Getting ready tonight had been a ritual of armoring herself. She chose a dress of deep emerald silk that clung to her curves, a color that brought out the fire in her auburn hair. It was a dress that spoke of confidence, of a woman who was not afraid to be seen. Her friend, Lena, had come over to help, zipping her up and clasping a delicate diamond necklace, a gift to herself, around her neck. "You look like you could end a man's entire career with one look," Lena had said, a fierce loyalty burning in her eyes. "Go in there and remind them who the hell you are." But as Iris stood in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, the sheer scale of the event was intimidating. Chandeliers dripped crystals from the ceiling, casting a golden glow on the city's elite. The air hummed with the quiet, confident buzz of money and power. And then she saw him. Adrian looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. His suit was tailored to perfection, his dark hair impeccably styled. But there was a hardness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a possessiveness in the way his hand rested on the small of Tessa's back. Tessa was a vision in crimson, her youth a stark, painful contrast to the years Iris had invested in Adrian. She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Iris's nerves, tilting her head back to look up at Adrian with an adoration that was both cloying and performative. They were working the room, a power couple in their own right. Adrian, the brilliant CEO. Tessa, the ambitious protégé turned lover. Iris watched as people flocked to them, their laughter echoing across the marble floor. A bitter taste filled her mouth. These were the same people who had once called her a friend, who had attended their dinner parties and praised her impeccable taste. Now they orbited Adrian and his new star, leaving her on the periphery. She took a steadying breath, reminding herself why she was here. This wasn't about Adrian. This was about her. She forced her shoulders back, lifted her chin, and began to navigate the glittering crowd, a polite, detached smile fixed on her face. She exchanged pleasantries with a few familiar faces, enduring their pitying glances and awkward questions about how she was holding up. Each conversation was a small battle, a test of her composure. She was speaking to a potential client, a man who owned a chain of boutique hotels, when she felt a sudden chill. Adrian and Tessa were approaching, their path through the crowd leading them directly to her. It was inevitable, she knew, but the reality of the confrontation sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her veins. Tessa's eyes, a pale, icy blue, met hers, and a small, triumphant smile played on her lips. It was the smile of a victor, a woman who had not only taken her husband, but was now reveling in occupying her life. And in that moment, Iris knew that a polite escape was not an option. The battle she had been preparing for was about to begin. Adrian adjusted his bow tie, the silk feeling unusually tight against his throat. He hated these events, the forced smiles, the vacuous conversations, the constant, draining performance of being Adrian Kincaid, CEO of Viridian Dynamics. It was a role he played well, a mask he had perfected over the years, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. Beside him, Tessa was radiant, a vibrant slash of red against the muted tones of the ballroom. She was electric, her energy a stark contrast to his own growing weariness. She thrived in these environments, effortlessly charming investors and flattering the wives of board members. She saw this gala not as an obligation, but as an arena, a place to solidify her new position. "Darling, you haven't said a word in 10 minutes, she murmured, her fingers tracing a light pattern on his arm. "Is everything all right?" "Just strategizing," he lied, forcing a smile, thinking about the Q4 projections. It wasn't a complete lie. He was always thinking about the company. Viridian was his creation, his legacy, the only thing that had never disappointed him. He'd built it from a two-man startup in a cramped garage to a global tech giant. But the relentless pressure, the constant need to innovate, to stay ahead of the competition, had taken its toll. It had cost him his marriage. He wouldn't admit it to Tessa, or even to himself most days, but the ghost of Iris haunted him. It wasn't love, not anymore. That had been eroded by years of quiet resentment. He'd seen her support as complacency, her contentment as a lack of ambition. He'd been running a marathon, and he felt as though she was content to stand on the sidelines, cheering politely. He needed a partner who would run alongside him, someone who understood the thrill of the chase, the savage beauty of the corporate battlefield. Tessa understood. She was hungry, just as he had been at her age. She saw the world as a series of opportunities, of calculated risks and strategic alliances. She didn't just admire his empire, she wanted to help him conquer new territories. Her ambition was a potent aphrodisiac, a mirror to his own. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he would wake up to the unsettling feeling that her ambition was a far more voracious beast than he had anticipated. He had unleashed a force he wasn't sure he could control. He had brought her tonight to make a statement. The rumors about their affair had been circulating for months, a persistent, ugly whisper in the corporate corridors. He needed to reframe the narrative, to present Tessa not as the other woman, but as his rightful partner, a future leader at Viridian. It was a power play, a calculated move to quell the gossip and solidify his own authority. But as he scanned the crowd, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. He was looking for Iris. He had heard she was coming. His CFO had mentioned it in passing, a casual remark about her new interior design business and her connection to a board member from a rival firm. The news had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He had expected her to fade away, to retreat back to the quiet suburban life she had always claimed to want. He had not expected her to re-emerge in his world, on his turf. "There's Arthur Vance," Tessa said, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "We should go say hello. I heard he's looking to divest from his current logistics partner." "In a minute," Adrian said, his eyes still scanning the room. And then he saw her. She was standing by the champagne fountain, dressed in a shade of green that made her look like a queen from some ancient mythical land. She was more beautiful than he remembered, but it was a different kind of beauty. The softness was gone, replaced by a sleek, polished strength. There was a confidence in her posture, a self-possession that was entirely new. This was not the woman who had wept in their therapist's office. This was someone else. A strange, unwelcome mix of emotions washed over him. Anger, regret, and a flicker of something that felt dangerously like pride. He had created this woman, hadn't he? He had shattered her, and she had rebuilt herself from the pieces, stronger and more formidable than before. "Adrian, what is it?" Tessa asked, her voice sharp with impatience. She followed his gaze and her body stiffened. "Oh, she actually came." Her grip on his arm tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into the fabric of his suit. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," she hissed, her smile never wavering. "Let's go over. It's better to face it head on. Show everyone that we have nothing to hide." It was exactly the kind of aggressive, strategic thinking he had been drawn to. Tessa saw a threat and moved to neutralize it. And yet, as they began to walk towards Iris, Adrian felt a profound sense of dread. He was walking into a battle he had already lost, armed with a crown that suddenly felt too heavy to bear. He was about to confront the ghost of his past, and he had a sinking feeling that she was far more real than the woman currently on his arm. The St. Regis ballroom was a masterpiece of calculated opulence. It was a space designed to make powerful people feel at ease, a gilded cage where billion-dollar deals were brokered over canapes and cocktails. Iris had helped Adrian choose the venue for the gala years ago, drawn to the soaring ceilings and the intricate hand-painted frescoes that depicted scenes from Greek mythology. Now, standing under the watchful eyes of gods and goddesses, she felt a bitter irony. Here she was, a mortal caught in a drama of her own. She managed to extricate herself from the hotel magnate, promising to send him her portfolio in the morning. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She had seen them coming. Adrian, with his purposeful stride, and Tessa, a scarlet predator gliding in his wake. There was no escape. She turned towards the bar, needing a moment to fortify herself. As she waited, she caught snippets of conversation, the ambient noise of the city's elite. The market is volatile, but the energy sector is a safe bet. Flew in from Geneva this morning. The children are in Aspen with the nanny. Did you see her dress? A bit daring for a corporate event, don't you think? That last comment was followed by a pointed glance in her direction. Iris ignored it. She had spent too long trying to be invisible, to shrink herself to fit into the neat little box of Adrian Kincaid's wife. Tonight, she refused to be small. "Just a club soda with lime, please," she told the bartender. She needed a clear head. As she took the glass, her fingers cool against the condensation, a voice beside her, low and resonant, cut through the chatter. A wise choice. The champagne they serve at these things is notoriously mediocre. Iris turned. The man standing next to her was not someone she recognized from Adrian's circle. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit couldn't quite conceal. His hair was a distinguished silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, held a glint of amusement. He had a rugged, weathered quality that seemed out of place amongst the polished, manicured men of the tech world. "I'll have to take your word for it," Iris said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm pacing myself." "A strategist," the man said, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "I'm Rowan, by the way." He extended a hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. "Iris." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Iris," he said, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Are you enjoying the festivities?" The slight hesitation in his voice suggested a shared disdain for the event. "I'm here for work," Iris admitted. "Networking." "Ah, yes, the great corporate hunt," Rowan said with a wry chuckle. "I confess I'm hiding out at the bar until it's socially acceptable to leave." Before Iris could respond, the presence she had been dreading materialized beside her. "Iris, I wasn't sure you'd make it." Adrian's voice was smooth, controlled, but she could hear the underlying tension. She turned slowly, schooling her features into a mask of polite indifference. "Adrian," she said, her tone cool. "Tessa, you're looking well." Tessa's smile was razor-sharp. "Thank you, Iris. So are you. That's a lovely dress. Very green." The compliment was laced with a subtle barb, a dismissive flick of her wrist. The air crackled with unspoken history. The bartender, sensing the shift in atmosphere, suddenly became very busy polishing a glass at the far end of the bar. Rowan, however, remained, an intrigued, silent observer. "I was just catching up with my ex-wife," Adrian said to Rowan, a proprietary tone creeping into his voice. It was a subtle power move, an attempt to frame Iris in relation to him, to put her back in her old box. "Iris, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Rowan Blackwell," Rowan said, his voice calm and even. He didn't offer any further explanation, no company name or title. He didn't need to. A flicker of recognition and then alarm crossed Adrian's face. Rowan Blackwell wasn't just anyone. He was a legend, a reclusive, media-shy billionaire who had made his fortune in private equity. He was known for his ruthless business acumen and for acquiring and dismantling companies he deemed inefficient. His presence at the gala was unexpected and, for Adrian, deeply unsettling. Viridian Dynamics was in the middle of a new round of funding, and Blackwell's firm was one of the potential and most feared investors. "Mr. Blackwell," Adrian stammered, his composure momentarily slipping. "It's an honor. I'm Adrian Kincaid, CEO of Viridian Dynamics." "I know who you are," Rowan said, his gaze shifting from Adrian to Iris. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible message in that look, a silent alignment. Tessa, sensing the shift in power, stepped forward, her hand possessively on Adrian's arm. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mr. Blackwell. Adrian has so much respect for your work." Rowan's eyes flickered down to her hand and then back up, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said, his voice a polite, dismissive murmur. "It's Miss Voss, actually," Tessa corrected, a flush creeping up her neck. "My mistake," Rowan said, though his tone suggested it was no mistake at all. An awkward, heavy silence descended. Adrian was visibly flustered, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure of the unexpected encounter. He had brought Tessa here to project an image of power and control, but in the presence of Rowan Blackwell, he was suddenly a minor player. And Iris, the woman he had discarded, was standing beside the most powerful man in the room, a man who was looking at her with an expression of undisguised interest. The gilded cage of the ballroom suddenly felt very small, and the air was thick with the promise of a storm. The tension in the small space by the bar was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Adrian, who thrived on being the center of any room, was visibly off balance. He had planned this evening with military precision, every interaction, every conversation, designed to project an image of unassailable success. Rowan Blackwell's presence and his apparent familiarity with Iris was a variable he had not accounted for. "Well," Adrian said, attempting to reclaim control of the situation, "we should let you two catch up. Tessa and I have some people we need to see." He gave Iris a look that was a complex mixture of warning and resentment. "Don't embarrass me." But Tessa wasn't ready to retreat. She saw Iris's proximity to Blackwell as a challenge. "Actually, darling," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I was hoping to ask Iris a question." She turned her full attention to Iris, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "I've been meaning to reach out. We're thinking of redecorating the house, and I know how much effort you put into it. I was wondering if you could recommend a good painter. The grey you chose for the master bedroom is just so dreary. We want something with a bit more life." It was a declaration of war, disguised as a domestic inquiry. Every word was a carefully chosen weapon. "The house is mine now. The bedroom is mine now. Your taste is dreary. You are dreary." She was marking her territory, trying to reduce Iris to a mere footnote in the history of the house, in the history of Adrian's life. Iris felt a hot surge of anger, but she met it with an icy calm. She thought of the countless hours she had spent choosing that specific shade of grey, a calming, sophisticated colour called winter sky. She and Adrian had painted the room together one weekend, laughing as they splattered paint on each other's faces. The memory was now tainted, desecrated by the image of Tessa in her bed. She held Tessa's gaze, refusing to look away. "I'm afraid I can't help you," she said, her voice even. "My contacts are exclusively for my clients, and my client list is curated for those who appreciate subtlety and taste. I'm not sure your aesthetic would be a good fit." A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the people nearby who were pretending not to listen. It was a direct hit, a perfectly executed counterattack. Iris had not only insulted Tessa's taste, but had also subtly positioned her own work as exclusive and high-end, while dismissing Tessa as cheap and common. Tessa's face, for the first time, lost its composure. A flash of pure fury crossed her features before she masked it with a brittle smile. "I see. I suppose I'll have to find someone on my own." Adrian, sensing that the exchange was not going in their favor, stepped in. "Tessa, let's go," he said, his voice firm. He put a hand on her back, attempting to steer her away. But Tessa shook him off. She wasn't finished. She turned to Rowan, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You have to be careful who you associate with, Mr. Blackwell. Some people have a hard time letting go of the past. It can get messy." It was a desperate, clumsy move, an attempt to poison the well and paint Iris as an unstable, bitter ex-wife. Before Iris could even process the audacity of the remark, Rowan Blackwell spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "On the contrary, Ms. Voss," he said, his gaze fixed on Tessa, "I find that people who have endured the past often have the most interesting stories to tell. It's the ones who are desperate to rewrite it that you have to watch out for." He took a small step closer to Iris, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of alliance. "Iris was just telling me about her design firm. It sounds fascinating. In fact, I've been looking for someone to oversee the interiors for my new hotel in Santorini. Perhaps we could discuss it further." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Adrian's jaw went slack. Tessa's face paled. The Santorini project was the most talked-about luxury development in the world. Landing that contract would not just put Iris on the map, it would launch her into the stratosphere. It was a career-defining, life-changing opportunity, and Rowan Blackwell had just dangled it in front of her, in front of them, with a casualness that was breathtaking. He had not just defended her, he had elevated her. He had seen Tessa's petty, vindictive attack and had countered it with a move of such overwhelming power and grace that it left her speechless. He had unveiled Tessa's character for all to see, exposing her as a small, insecure woman grasping for a status she hadn't earned. Iris looked at Rowan, a silent question in her eyes. Was this real? Was he serious? He gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a look of reassurance, and in that moment, something shifted inside Iris. The last vestiges of the broken, grieving wife fell away, replaced by a surge of exhilarating, terrifying hope. She was no longer a victim in their drama. She was a player, and the game had just changed. The air by the bar was thick with the fallout from Rowan's bombshell announcement. Onlookers who had been feigning disinterest were now openly staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and glee. Corporate galas were often dull, predictable affairs. This was a live-action drama, and they had front-row seats. Adrian looked as though he had been physically struck. His face was a mask of disbelief and a dawning, horrified understanding. He had spent his entire career learning to read power dynamics, to anticipate market shifts and competitor movements. But he had never anticipated this. He had walked into his own gala, a king in his own court, only to be checkmated by a man he was trying to impress, all in defense of the woman he had cast aside. His carefully constructed narrative for the evening, the unveiling of his new partner, the projection of a future-proof Viridian, was in ruins. Tessa, for her part, seemed to shrink. The vibrant, confident woman in the crimson dress was gone, replaced by someone small and exposed. She had played her hand, an aggressive, petty move, and had been countered with a show of force so overwhelming it was almost insulting. She looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading for him to fix it, to do something, but he was lost in his own spiraling thoughts. Rowan Blackwell seemed oblivious to the shockwaves he had created. He turned his back on Adrian and Tessa, a deliberate final dismissal, and focused his full attention on Iris. "I apologize for putting you on the spot," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "But I have a feeling you can handle it, and I wasn't lying. I do have a hotel in Santorini, and I do need a designer with a vision." Iris's mind was racing. She felt a dizzying combination of gratitude, shock, and a healthy dose of suspicion. Men like Rowan Blackwell didn't do things without a reason. What was his motive? Was this a genuine business proposition, or was she just a pawn in some larger game he was playing with Adrian? "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" Rowan's gaze was direct, his blue eyes searching hers. "Let's just say I have a low tolerance for bullies," he said simply. "And I have a good eye for talent. I've seen your work. The penthouse you did for Michael Vance, it was brilliant. You created a home, not just a showpiece." He knew her work. The realization sent a jolt of validation through her that was more potent than any champagne. He hadn't just been defending a damsel in distress. He had been scouting a professional. "Now," he continued, a hint of a smile returning to his lips, "I believe we have a business proposition to discuss, and I, for one, would rather do it somewhere with better champagne and less drama. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow night?" It was a whirlwind. Her head was spinning. Just an hour ago she had been dreading a confrontation with her ex-husband. Now she was being offered the contract of a lifetime and asked to dinner by one of the most enigmatic and powerful men in the world. She looked past Rowan's shoulder and saw Adrian still standing there watching them. His face was a thundercloud of rage and confusion. He looked utterly lost. For the first time she didn't feel a pang of pity or a surge of anger. She felt nothing. He was a figure from a past life, a story that was already over. She turned back to Rowan, a genuine smile, the first of the night, spreading across her face. "I would love that," she said. "Excellent," Rowan said. He glanced around the now buzzing ballroom. "I think our work here is done. Shall we make a memorable exit?" Before she could ask what he meant, he gently took her elbow and began to steer her towards the grand entrance. As they walked, a path seemed to clear before them. The whispers followed them, a wave of speculation and awe. They were just a few feet from the massive oak doors when Rowan stopped. He turned to face her, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. The ballroom seemed to fade away, the noise, the lights, the prying eyes. There was only the intensity of his gaze. to new beginnings," he murmured. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a passionate, fiery kiss. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply, shockingly public. It was a kiss that was meant to be seen. It was a statement, a rewriting of the rules, a final, definitive checkmate. Across the room, Adrian Kincaid froze. The glass of scotch he had just taken from a passing waiter slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the sudden, deafening silence of the ballroom. All he could see was his ex-wife, the woman he had deemed unworthy, being kissed by the one man he could not afford to have as an enemy. And in that moment, he understood that he had not just lost his wife, he had lost a game he never even knew he was playing. The sound of the glass shattering was the only thing that broke the spell. It was a sharp, percussive crack that echoed the fracture in Adrian's reality. He stood motionless, a statue in a bespoke suit, as the amber liquid and shards of crystal spread across the polished floor around his expensive shoes. He didn't notice the waiters who scurried to clean up the mess. He didn't hear the gasps and frantic whispers that erupted around him. His entire universe had contracted to a single, impossible image, Iris, his Iris, being kissed by Rowan Blackwell. His mind, usually a sharp, analytical machine, sputtered and failed. It was like watching a film in a foreign language with no subtitles. The scene was clear, but the meaning was incomprehensible. Iris, who had cried for weeks after he'd left, who he had condescendingly told his lawyer was too emotional to be rational. Iris, who he had assumed would spend the rest of her life quietly managing her modest settlement. That Iris was now the focus of the entire gala, the object of a public display of affection from a man whose net worth dwarfed the GDP of a small country. Tessa's voice, shrill and panicked, finally pierced through the fog. "Adrian? Adrian, are you seeing this? Do something!" He turned his head slowly, looking at her as if for the first time. The crimson dress suddenly seemed garish, her perfectly applied makeup a brittle mask. Her panic felt irritating. He had been drawn to her ambition, her fire. But now, in the face of a real power play, her fire just looked like a child's tantrum. She was out of her depth, and so he terrifyingly realized, was he? "Do what, Tessa?" he asked, his voice a dead, hollow thing. "What exactly do you suggest I do?" He turned back to the scene at the door. Rowan Blackwell pulled back from the kiss, his hand still resting on Iris's arm. He murmured something to her, and she smiled, a real radiant smile that Adrian hadn't seen in years. It was a smile that lit her up from the inside, and it was a smile that was not for him. Then, together, they turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of stunned silence and 1,000 questions. As the doors closed behind them, the dam of whispers broke. The low hum of the gala escalated into a cacophony of excited chatter. Adrian was no longer the host and CEO. He was the subject of gossip, the cuckolded ex-husband, a man who had been publicly and spectacularly upstaged. Every glance in his direction felt like an accusation, a judgment. He could see the pity in some eyes, the schadenfreude in others. His colleagues, his board members, his investors, they were all witnesses to his humiliation. "We're leaving," he said to Tessa, his voice clipped. "But we can't just leave," she protested. "That will look like we're running away. We need to stay, to show them we don't care." "And how do you propose we do that?" he snapped, his control finally breaking. "By pretending that didn't just happen, by making small talk about the market while the entire room is dissecting my failed marriage." He grabbed her by the elbow, his grip harder than intended, and began to steer her towards a side exit, away from the prying eyes. He needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, the weight of 1,000 judgments. The drive back to the house, his house, not their house, he reminded himself, was silent and suffocating. Tessa sat rigidly in the passenger seat, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, careful not to smudge her mascara. Adrian gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his mind replaying the kiss over and over. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a transfer of power. Blackwell had, in one smooth, calculated gesture, stripped him of his narrative. Adrian had brought his mistress to the company gala to show her off, to show everyone that he had moved on, that he had upgraded. He had intended to be the victor, the one who had gotten away with it all. Instead, Blackwell had positioned Iris as the prize, a woman of value, of talent, a woman worthy of a billionaire's attention. And in doing so, he had framed Adrian as the fool who had let her go. When they arrived at the house, Tessa finally broke the silence. "This is all your fault," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "You told me she was no one, a nobody. You told me she wouldn't be a problem." "She wasn't a problem," Adrian retorted, slamming the car door. "Rowan Blackwell is the problem." "And why is he a problem for you?" she shot back, following him into the cold, cavernous foyer. "Because he's interested in her." "What is it about her, Adrian? Even now, after everything, what is it that I don't have?" It was a question he couldn't answer. He looked around the vast, minimalist space that Tessa had been so eager to redecorate. The dreary grey walls, the carefully chosen art, the furniture that he and Iris had spent weekends hunting for in antique shops. He had thought of it as just stuff, things he had acquired. But now he saw Iris's touch everywhere. He saw the life, the warmth that had been systematically erased and replaced with something cold and sterile. He had traded a home for a showpiece. He had traded a partner for a protégé. He had made a series of calculated decisions based on ambition and ego, and it had all led to this moment of profound, shattering loss. He had not only lost Iris, he had lost control. And for a man like Adrian Kincaid, losing control was a fate worse than death. He sank onto a designer sofa that offered no comfort, the weight of his miscalculations crushing him. The king was in his castle, but the walls were closing in. The morning after the gala, the city's financial and social circles were buzzing. The kiss was the talk of every boardroom, every exclusive brunch spot. It wasn't just gossip, it was a market-moving event. Rowan Blackwell did nothing by accident. His public display of interest in Iris Calder was interpreted as a signal, a move on the corporate chessboard, and everyone was scrambling to figure out what it meant. For Iris, the day was a surreal blur. Her phone had been ringing off the hook since 7 a.m. Old friends who hadn't spoken to her in years were suddenly reaching out. Potential clients who had been non-committal were now desperate to book a consultation. A major design magazine wanted to feature her in their next issue. The Santorini project wasn't even a certainty yet, but the mere association with Rowan Blackwell had given her a level of credibility she had previously only dreamed of. She sat in her small, sunlit apartment, a space that was a true reflection of her, filled with books, art, and comfortable, mismatched furniture. It was a world away from the cold, museum-like house she had shared with Adrian. She felt a profound sense of whiplash. Last night, she had been David walking into a den of Goliaths. Today, she was the one with the slingshot. Her dinner with Rowan was scheduled for that evening. She was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness than she had felt before the gala. It was the anxiety of opportunity, not of dread. She spent the day researching him, trying to understand the man who had so dramatically intervened in her life. He was a paradox, a ruthless businessman who was also a major philanthropist, a recluse who had just made the most public statement imaginable. His motives were still a mystery, and she knew she had to tread carefully. Meanwhile, at the gleaming headquarters of Viridian Dynamics, Adrian was in crisis mode. His company's stock had taken a small but noticeable dip in pre-market trading. The rumor mill was in overdrive. Was Blackwell planning a hostile takeover? Was his interest in Iris a way to get inside information, to exploit a personal vulnerability? Adrian's board members were calling, demanding answers he didn't have. He had a scheduled meeting with Blackwell's firm in 2 weeks to discuss the funding round. What was supposed to be a standard pitch had now become a high-stakes showdown. He felt exposed, vulnerable, his personal life tangled up with his professional fate in a way he had never imagined. His day was made worse by Tessa. She had shown up to the office wearing a defiantly bright yellow dress, her demeanor a brittle imitation of confidence. She was overcompensating, trying too hard to act as if nothing had happened. She rearranged the photos on his desk, replacing a picture of his parents with one of the two of them in Paris. She called him darling in front of his executive assistant. Her every move was a desperate attempt to reassert her claim on him, and it was suffocating. "We need to issue a statement," she said, pacing his office. "A joint one, announcing our engagement. That will show them, it will show her, that we're solid, that last night was nothing." Adrian looked at her frantic, grasping energy, and felt a wave of revulsion. An engagement, a marriage. He had just escaped one. The thought of entering another, this time with a woman who saw it as a strategic move in a PR war, was nauseating. "No," he said, his voice flat. "We're not doing that." "Why not?" she demanded. "Are you ashamed of me, after everything I've done for you, for this company?" "What you've done," he said, the words tasting like acid, "is escalate a situation that required finesse. You walked up to my ex-wife and picked a fight in front of the one man I cannot afford to alienate. This isn't a game, Tessa." "I was defending us," she cried. "You were marking your territory," he shot back, "and in doing so, you made us both look cheap and insecure. Blackwell saw it. Everyone saw it." The argument escalated, their voices rising in the soundproofed office. It was the first real fight of their relationship, and it was ugly, stripping away the veneer of shared ambition to reveal the raw, selfish motives beneath. Adrian saw her not as a partner, but as a liability, and Tessa, in his cold dismissal, saw the precariousness of her position, a position based not on love, but on a proximity to power that was now under threat. The ripple effect of that single kiss was spreading, destabilizing everything Adrian had built. It was forcing him to confront the choices he had made, the true cost of his ambition. He had believed he could control the narrative, that he could simply replace one wife with a newer model, like upgrading a piece of software. He had failed to understand that people were not assets to be managed. They were complex, unpredictable, and they had the power to write their own stories. And as he prepared for the most important meeting of his career, he had the sinking feeling that he was no longer the author of his own fate. Iris and her mysterious billionaire benefactor were holding the pen. The restaurant Rowan chose was the kind of place that didn't have a sign. It was tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street, its entrance marked only by a single discreet lantern. Inside, the atmosphere was one of hushed intimacy. It was a place for quiet conversations, for secrets to be shared. Iris had chosen her outfit as carefully as she had for the gala, but with a different intention. Tonight was not about armor. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry the diamond necklace she had bought for herself. She wanted to meet Rowan not as a project or a pawn, but as herself. He was already there, seated at a secluded corner table. He stood as she approached, his smile genuine and welcoming. In the soft light of the restaurant, he looked less like a corporate titan and more like a ruggedly handsome explorer, his face etched with the lines of a life lived to the fullest. "Iris," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble, "you look beautiful." The compliment was simple, direct, and it made her feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the glass of wine the waiter was pouring. The conversation at first was light. They talked about art, about travel, about the city. Iris found herself relaxing, surprised by how easy he was to talk to. He was a brilliant listener, asking insightful questions about her work, her passion for creating spaces that felt like home. He spoke of his own life with a surprising candor, of a childhood that was anything but privileged, of the relentless drive that had propelled him to success. "I learned early on," he said, his gaze intense, "that the world is divided into two types of people, those who build things and those who take things. I decided I wanted to be a builder." As the main course arrived, the conversation inevitably turned to the events of the previous night. I hope I didn't overstep, Rowan said, his expression serious. My intention was to help, not to complicate your life. You did both, Iris admitted with a small smile. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. I think I've been offered every design job in the city, and as for complicating things, Adrian isn't used to being on the back foot. Adrian Kincaid, Rowan said, swirling the wine in his glass, is a man who has had things his own way for too long. He's a brilliant innovator, I'll give him that. Viridian's core technology is revolutionary, but he's arrogant. He surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear. That's a dangerous way to run a company. It's a dangerous way to live a life. Here it was, the opening, the reason for the dinner, for the kiss, for the job offer. Is that why you're interested in Viridian? Iris asked, her voice even. Because you see a weakness? Rowan met her gaze directly. There was no subterfuge in his eyes. I'm interested in Viridian because its technology has the potential to change the world, but it's being mismanaged. Adrian is too focused on short-term gains, on appeasing shareholders. He's lost sight of the long-term vision. His company is vulnerable, and when things are vulnerable, people like me take notice. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He's coming to me for funding in 2 weeks. He thinks it's a formality. He's wrong. I'm considering a different kind of investment, a controlling interest, a takeover. Iris's blood ran cold, a hostile takeover. It would destroy Adrian. It would be the end of the company he had poured his life into. A part of her, the wounded, betrayed part, felt a savage thrill at the thought. But another, deeper part, the part that remembered the young, idealistic man she had once loved, felt a pang of something akin to sorrow. What does this have to do with me? She asked, her voice quiet. You, Iris, Rowan said, leaning forward, are his blind spot, his Achilles heel. He underestimated you. He discarded you. He never imagined you would be in a position to affect his future. He's so consumed with what happened at the gala with our association that his focus is scattered. He'll come into that meeting emotional, defensive. He'll make mistakes, and I will be there to capitalize on them. The pieces clicked into place. The kiss, the job offer. It was all a beautifully orchestrated, ruthless strategy. She was the weapon he was using to soften the target. So I'm the bait, she said, the words leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. You are not the bait, Rowan corrected, his voice firm. You are the catalyst, and the job offer is very real. I don't mix business with pleasure, and I never make offers I don't intend to honor. You are the best person for the job in Santorini. Your association with me and the effect it has on Adrian is simply a fortunate coincidence. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, reassuring, but she felt a chill run down her spine. I am offering you a choice, Iris. You can walk away from this table right now, and the Santorini job is still yours. No strings attached. Or, you can help me. You know Adrian better than anyone. You know his weaknesses, his pressure points. You can give me the leverage I need to ensure a smooth transition when I take control of Viridian. It was the devil's bargain. He was offering her revenge on a silver platter, the chance to be instrumental in the downfall of the man who had shattered her life. It was a seductive, intoxicating thought. To have that kind of power, to be the one holding the cards. But what would it cost her? Would it turn her into someone like Adrian, someone who used people as pawns in a game? She looked at Rowan Blackwell, at the brilliant, calculating man who saw the world as a chessboard. He was offering her a chance to become a queen, but she had to decide if the price of the crown was a piece of her own soul. The choice was hers, and it would define the rest of her life. Iris spent the next 2 weeks in a state of suspended animation. She went through the motions of her life, meeting with clients, sketching out preliminary ideas for the Santorini Hotel, speaking to her lawyer about the contract from Blackwell Enterprises. But her mind was elsewhere. It was consumed by the choice Rowan had laid before her, to help him or not to help him. It was a question that echoed in the quiet moments of her day and haunted her sleepless nights. Part of her craved the retribution. She remembered the humiliation of the divorce, the cold, clinical way Adrian's lawyers had dissected her life, her contributions to his success dismissed as the frivolous hobbies of a housewife. She remembered Tessa's smug, triumphant smile. The desire to see them both brought low was a potent, visceral thing. Rowan was offering her a front-row seat to their demise, a chance to be the architect of their downfall. But another part of her recoiled from the idea. She had spent the last year rebuilding her life, not on the ashes of her past, but on a new foundation of her own making. Her business was built on creating spaces of warmth and integrity. Could she reconcile that with the cold, calculated act of corporate sabotage? Would winning this war against Adrian turn her into a casualty of her own making, leaving her with a victory that felt as hollow as the house he now occupied? She tried to talk to Lena about it, but she couldn't bring herself to reveal the full extent of Rowan's plan. How could she explain the devil's bargain without sounding like a villain in a soap opera? "He's playing chess, Iris," Lena had said, sensing the undercurrents. "And he's using you as a piece. Just make sure you know which piece you are. Don't be a pawn when you can be a queen." The advice stuck with her. A queen. A queen protects her kingdom. She moves with power and purpose. She is not a passive victim. The day before Adrian's meeting with Rowan, she received an unexpected call. It was from Adrian's father, Robert Kincaid, a kind, gentle man who had always treated her like a daughter. He was worried. "He's not himself, Iris," he'd said, his voice frail over the phone. "He's angry, distracted. He's going to lose everything he's worked for if he's not careful. I know it's not my place to ask, but he always listened to you." The call was a turning point. It reminded her that this wasn't just about Adrian and Tessa. It was about the thousands of employees at Viridian, people with families and mortgages, whose livelihoods depended on the company's stability. A hostile takeover would be brutal, leading to mass layoffs and restructuring. That evening, she made her decision. She called Rowan. "I've thought about your offer," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I'll help you, but not in the way you think." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm listening," he said. "I won't give you his secrets," she said. "I won't tell you about his tells when he's bluffing or the anxieties that keep him up at night. That's not who I am. But I will give you something more valuable. I'll give you a strategy for a better outcome, for everyone." She spent the next hour laying out her plan. It was a bold, audacious gambit, a move that only someone who understood both the business and the man could conceive. The next day, Adrian walked into the boardroom at Blackwell Enterprises, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. He had spent the last 2 weeks in a paranoid frenzy, trying to shore up his defenses, but he knew he was outmatched. Rowan Blackwell was seated at the head of the massive mahogany table, his expression unreadable. The meeting began, and it was as brutal as Adrian had feared. Rowan and his team dismantled Adrian's presentation piece by piece, exposing every weakness, every overly optimistic projection. An hour into the meeting, Adrian was defeated. He could see the writing on the wall. Blackwell was going to take his company. "So that's it then?" Adrian said, his voice hoarse. "You're going to tear it all down." "That was the original plan," Rowan said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "But a new proposal has been brought to my attention." He slid a folder across the table. Adrian opened it, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a detailed plan for a strategic partnership. Blackwell Enterprises would become the majority shareholder, injecting a massive amount of capital into Viridian. Adrian would remain as CEO, but his power would be checked by a new, independent board. The plan focused on long-term sustainable growth, on research and development, on employee retention. It was a plan to build, not to destroy. And at the end of the proposal was a single typed page outlining the conditions for the deal. The final condition made the blood drain from Adrian's face. The immediate termination of Tessa Voss for breach of professional conduct and actions detrimental to the company's reputation. It was Iris's move, her queen's gambit. She hadn't chosen simple revenge. She had chosen a more complex, more elegant victory. She had saved his company, but she had surgically and ruthlessly removed the cancer that had been poisoning it. She had forced him to choose between his legacy and his mistress. Adrian looked up at Rowan, a dawning understanding on his face. He had been so focused on fighting a war that he hadn't realized the terms of the peace treaty were being written by the woman he had wronged. "This was her idea," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Rowan simply nodded. She believed that the man who built Viridian was still in there somewhere. She was willing to bet on him. "The question is, Mr. Kincaid, are you willing to bet on yourself?" Adrian was left with a choice. He could refuse, his pride wounded, and watch his empire crumble. Or he could accept, swallowing the bitter pill of his own humiliation and save the one thing he had ever truly loved. In the end, it wasn't a choice at all. He had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and ultimately saved from himself. The Queen had taken the king, not by force, but by a strategy so brilliant, so unexpected, that all he could do was concede the game. He picked up a pen and signed the agreement, the stroke of the ink feeling like both a surrender and a second chance. Thank you for watching this story unfold. We hope you were on the edge of your seat through every twist and turn of Iris's journey from betrayal to triumph. If you felt her pain, cheered for her comeback, and were shocked by the final move, let us know in the comments below. What do you think will happen next for Iris, Adrian, and Rowan? Your engagement helps us create more stories like this one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We have many more tales of love, loss, and redemption coming your way, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for being a part of our community.